Колеги, друзі, доброго дня.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, today our press conference about war crimes against the media workers is about that unique situation which started since February 2022. February 24th, 2022, which was the beginning of a full-scale invasion. Nevertheless, the invasion itself, although it was not full-scale, started back in 2014, and when the occupation of Crimea started. And journalists, media workers, cameramen, photographers, they always are at the front line of the occupation and invasion when it happens, and they are at the front line and come to first contact with the military and paramilitary regiments and the military units of the enemies like Wagner. That's why in each occupied territory, these were media workers who had become the first targeted group of civilians that were arrested, were kept in prisons, were tortured, and were killed. More than 500 media workers had been attacked since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and this is the category of people who are so important for the society and who suffer most because of their special role. Today we're discussing how we can respond to the suffering of these people, how to stop these crimes from happening, how to bring back all those journalists and media workers who suffer from these war crimes against them. And our today's format will be as follows. First, I will give the floor to you for a 5-minute introductory speech, and then we'll have joint discussion. And today's our press briefing is held on the framework of the joint project between the Center for Civil Liberties and the Embassy of Denmark. The project was started even before the full-scale invasion, but now it had become rather topical. And project manager Anna Popova will present in more detail this project. So I'm pleased to give the floor to Serhii Tomilenko, head of the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for invitation. Thank you to the Union of Civil Liberties. You're one of those organizations in Ukraine who organize trainings for all the civil society organizations in human rights and in civil liberties, and teach them how to protect these values. We, as a National Union of Journalists, we try to contribute to the database of your project about war crimes against journalists and media workers. We are able to provide first-hand information about the processes that usually happen in the newly occupied territories. Immediately upon the occupation, the Russian authorities started to chase the professional independent media workers, because they feel that independent media workers, they are a threat to the propaganda, they are a threat because they can discover truth and communicate this truth to the world about what's going on in the occupied territories, while the Russian authorities, the Russian occupational authorities, they try to create the informational bubble for local population and to prevent people from knowing what's going around their immediate community. You mentioned the figure of 500 journalists and media workers, but actually, I suspect the figure could be larger, because I think that many journalists simply did not mention about minor cases of injustice, but I would like to mention that 63 media workers were killed and or perished otherwise in result of the full-scale invasion. And we have 14 proved cases verified by the American NGOs and the NGOs, journalist NGOs in London. When media workers were killed or tortured or imprisoned and then killed, then we have more than 40 people, 40 journalists and media workers who were killed fighting in as a personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine or defense forces of Ukraine. Quite often, the occupants try to encourage media workers to work as propaganda agents in the occupied territories, and when they fail to do this in bigger majority, they try to bring people from the mainland Russian territory. And we know about the strong practice of theft of local media trade marks and brands, media brands. For example, in Mariupol, there was a publication of Priazovsky Рабочий publication. This was a newspaper, and since neither of the newspaper staff agreed to cooperate with them, 3 weeks later they started to publish the newspaper in Rostov, pretending they were publishing it in Mariupol, but there were no one Mariupol journalist published in that. The same happened in Mangush. And now we, as the National Union of Journalists and our international partners, we try to draw attention to these facts at the international arena. We document the war crimes. We apply to the Global Association of Journalists, and we promote the idea that this special tribunal as to the war crimes of Russia should be established, and that the cases of journalists will become part of this huge tribunal. And we believe that we have to bring to responsibility those propagandistic media in Russia who create support to the violent war, to this terrible war among the Russian population. And we had published a special collection of materials, which is called The Executed Freedom of Speech, which describes how independent media workers are being extinguished, are being killed by the occupants, and nevertheless they try to provide independent information, and we have many testimonies when true information rescues life. I am happy to give the floor to Svitlana Ostapa, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Detector Media and Head of the Supervisory Board of Suspilne TV channel. Thank you for giving me the floor. Russia is very much irritated with the existence of independent media. I think they have already totally forgot what independent media means, and they want to destroy independent media as a species in the mass media. 85 employees of Suspilne TV channel are now in the defense forces. 2 our workers were killed, and 1 our employee is are taken as war prisoners. Alexei was our cameraman, and he had been working with us since 2020. He contributed to the implementation of many our important projects. Quite often he attended the front line, and in February 2022 he joined the Territorial Defense Forces. Later he was seconded to the front line in Donetsk, and he was killed, and he left a widow and a small daughter. Then Dmitro, who worked in our music department, and in our programs, he had the nickname Ivan Lopata. He served as a sniper, and he left after him parents, son, and bride. Then our colleague Ivan was conscribed to the army in the first days in spring 2022, carrying out the combat tasks, combat missions in Donetsk Oblast. He was imprisoned and taken as a war prisoner. And I would like to mention the names of those who now serve in the defense forces. Yevhen Staranets, Tomchenkas, Yevhen Kolomits from Kherson, Serhii Silkin from Ivano-Frankivsk, Volodymyr Fesyuk from Kyiv. Suspilne TV channel, even before the full-scale invasion, made a decision what to do in case of full-scale invasion, and we developed several scenarios, and the worst of them was to evacuate from Kiev to Lviv. Actually, the worst scenario happened, and we evacuated from Kiev to Lviv, and we continued broadcasts from Lviv without any interruption immediately upon evacuation. Because of the Russian attacks, the TV towers in Kiev, Kharkiv, Izium, Lysychansk, Belopilya, Antopol, Vinnytsia, and Zaporizhia. So the towers were damaged, and broadcasting there was interrupted. In Melitopol also, the TV tower is conquered, and we cannot broadcast there. An attempt was made to damage our online archives. They had sent several viruses. In Kherson, after the occupation, we filed a case to court about the damage of our equipment and premises. We lost the access to our premises in Severodonetsk, and thanks to our colleagues, they managed to hide the equipment from Severodonetsk center. Zhytomyr and Sumy regional branches were damaged. Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv were also damaged, and the building of Suspilne in Kiev, because of the attack on TV tower, is calculated at the level of almost 3 million hryvnia, and we had to relocate to Khreshchatyk, where the premises is much smaller, because we cannot use our main office, which was damaged together with the TV tower. We had applied the case to the European Court of Human Rights for the violence of the human rights, that we cannot work because of the attacks on TV tower, and that application to the European Court of Human Rights was submitted with the support from the Ukrainian Helsinki Union. 514 journalists. This is the exact figure of those media workers who suffered because of the full-scale invasion, and the same figure for those who were killed or otherwise perished because of this war. We feel huge support from our colleagues in Europe and Japan, and then from Northern American countries. They are shocked with the fact that we can live in the current situation in Kiev, and we continue to work, and we continue to broadcast, and moreover, journalists not only create information, but they also document war crimes for further submission of these cases in war crimes to the courts. Thank you. When Serhii and Svitlana say that the Russians try to persecute journalists and media workers. This is because they are afraid of truth. They are targeting the professional coverage of events. That's why, since Russians try to disseminate propaganda, they are frightened to have this independent voice of journalists. Actually, propaganda is a form of control, why professional journalists, journalism, independent journalism is a form of freedom. That's why we witness so many attacks on people, so many attacks on equipment, on premises, and on ability to broadcast. You mentioned many people who changed their peaceful professions into the military professions. Even those journalists who were first to document war crimes back in 2014, these were professional journalists, and all those journalists from that group who documented the war crimes back in 2014, they are today all in the army, all in the defense forces of Ukraine. All of them are at the front line. All 6 of them are at the front line. And today we're discussing the violation of the human rights and of the war crimes against journalists. Now I'm happy to present Anna Popova, who will cover the taking of journalists as and media workers as prisoners of war. Thank you. The Center of Civil Liberties had registered kidnappings and taking of media workers as war prisoners. Since February 2022, our center has registered more than 1,000 cases of kidnapping, of forced disappearance, and 352 out of them were liberated. 336 remain in imprisonment, and 16, unfortunately, 16 people were killed. You all have QR code who would immediately link you to this interactive map, which shows all the updated and verified cases of journalists or media workers who were kidnapped. And here again you have the status of war prisoners who were liberated, who remain as war prisoners, and one was killed. Then you have a split by the regions, Zaporizhia Oblast, Kherson Oblast, Kiev Oblast, and Crimea. And then the split by the place of detention, where people were detained or arrested. We had analyzed where people were detained. The biggest number were arrested at home when local collaborators provide information to the Russian authorities, not Russian occupants. And Russian occupants come and arrest people. 3 people were arrested in course of the professional work. 3 journalists were arrested in the street, and 1 journalist was arrested at the checkpoint. that this is result of split of statistics based on the information provided by families and relatives of journalists and media workers. Thank you for your trust. I would like to draw your attention to those 4 people who remain in as war prisoners. Heluk Dmitro was abducted, was kidnapped in March 2022, and he is kept in Berdyansk region in pre-detention facility. Unfortunately, we do not know the exact place of his location. Serhii was abducted in March 2022 between Novokakhovka and Tavrisk in Kherson region. Now he is kept in Berdyansk. Irina Danilovich was detained in April 2022 in Koktebel in Crimea. The occupational court has made its judgment. Irina Danilovich announced starving campaign. Her health deteriorated in result of that protest, but nevertheless she does not get enough support. And Irina Levchenko was kidnapped together with her husband. And this information arrived quite recently in early May this year. And now she is kept in Melitopol. So we are keen to advocate for the sake of these people and try to liberate them from the imprisonment. I would like to add, thank you for this presentation, thank you for the figures. I can add information about Irina Levchenko, who was detained the latest. She is member of our association, of our union, and she was my contact point in Zaporizhia. We remain in contact with those our colleagues who remain in the occupied territory in Zaporizhia region. And they provided with the information about Irina's disappearance around May 10th. Unfortunately, we cannot verify this information because we do not have access to the direct sources of information. We tried to understand what was going on with Irina, and it looks like they allegedly are blamed. They are charged with the extremism charges, and we so we try to keep ties with parents. Irina Levchenko is the former journalist. She had stopped the journalist activity when Melitopol was occupied, but we continue to say that Irina Levchenko is kept as professional journalist. I would like to use this opportunity to emphasize on the situation of the civilian hostages. I encourage everybody who has such information to apply to our center and to report about such cases. This is a new type of war crimes. And these cases are in much detail described in the international humanitarian law. The Russian Federation keeps inventing new types of human crime, of war crimes. And we need to discover and to present this information, what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, and to report that to international bodies and allow the international courts and the International Criminal Court to add the things that are done by Russia to the general list of war crimes. I would like now to give the floor to Serhii Movchan. He is head of the documenting department department for documenting the crimes of the Helsinki Union of Ukraine, and documenting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crime of genocide is a rather specific area, and Serhii would describe the situation of cases against media workers from the documenting perspective. Our organization has been dealing with the documenting of war crimes since 2014, since the beginning of the war. In February 2022, we found the need to extend our initiative to cover bigger territory, bigger number of human losses. While we are discussing the issue of abducted civilians, of the victims of forced disappearance, as of today, we have 4,000 of abducted people and media workers in the occupied territory. They become the first targets for such forced disappearances. Today, some of you mentioned several journalists with whom Ukrainian Helsinki Union accompanies and takes to the international organizations. We should not silence these cases. We all, as professionals, should collect information about alleged war crimes. Journalists quite often work at the front lines, work in the occupied territories, and work in the pre-front line territories where the concentration of cases which we document is huge, is the biggest. Our objective is to collect, to process, and coverage of the information. Then civil activists join us. They offer legal expertise and further assistance. This is a good synergy when journalists work in dangerous conditions. This is quite needed. Today you mentioned journalists who were taken as prisoners of war in course of carrying out their duties. You mentioned the name of Angela Slobodyan, who is now back home and back to journalism. That's good. At that very time, when we received information about Angela, we had people who were ready to document properly the Angela's case and to follow it up. Of course, Russia tries to extinguish the possibility to broadcast, to destroy TV equipment, broadcasting equipment. They were more interested in PC pads and then in very expensive broadcasting equipment. Journalists had to stay in underground. Many journalists now are very much scared to come back to their homes in the occupied areas because there are many people there who can make harm to them because they are pro-Russians and they have maintained contacts with the enemies. But we have to document all those cases. My experience of communications with people, when I ask question, have you applied for justice to the police or law enforcement agencies? Many people say we had described our situation to journalists. This shows high level of trust to journalists, and that journalists should be ready to document many cases. I personally quite often visit many points in bulletproof vest. I see how people are open to journalists. That's good that journalists keep in line with their professional standards and they do a lot of useful work for society. Perhaps this is the reason why they become the victims, targeted victims of the Russian Federation in the occupied territories. Thank you, colleagues, for your introductory remarks. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, I would like to ask a question to the panelists. How do you see the punishment for the crimes against the journalists? You mentioned application to the International Court of Human Rights and the establishment of the tribunal. And how do you see reconstruction of possibility for media workers to work in profession after liberation. What the state has to do to develop the freedom of speech, and what challenges will the journalists face? You have asked so many questions. As for the punishment, all journalists are people, and there will be, and there are a lot of people who suffered because of the war crimes, and punishment will be equal to all those who suffered from the war crimes. I live in Bucha, I reside in Bucha, and I have created several documentaries about what happened in Bucha during occupation, and journalists acted as investigation journalists and investigated tanks, armored vehicles to answer a lot of questions. Of course, the Russians have to be brought to responsibility. When journalists call to Russia and to those soldiers who killed the whole families, the Russian military pretend they do not understand that they have committed crimes. As to the work after occupation, actually, we are not waiting for the victory. We start to work in the deoccupied territories immediately. When we think about small communities and towns, we have to allow and revive the local media, because each community, however small, should have its own media voice, especially if such small communities receive some funding for recovery. As for the national level, it is important to restore damaged networks. I have not mentioned, but a huge number of transmitters is damaged, and we cannot broadcast on average length waves. This is big, large-scale equipment which was destroyed. And of course, the need of the government and the parliament will be needed to restore these broadcasting networks. I mentioned just few items for the needs of TV broadcasting, but much is also needed for the online media. You know, all those media which relocated either to the west of Ukraine or relocated abroad and continued to work and to cover what was happening in the small towns. And now we admire their work. Even before the war, it was difficult for media, especially small local media, to find funding for its work. Well, now media will need more financial support I'm not sure whether the state will be able to provide such support to independent media. Maybe some charity foundations will provide financial assistance during the first years. Maybe our partners in reconstruction work. I would like to comment on several topics. As for the punishment, I think one of the successes achieved by Ukrainian Union of Journalists is that Russian journalists are deprived from their journalist status at the international arena. That is, Russian Federation of Journalists, Russian Union of Journalists is now suspended as a member of the International Journalists Union. This was demonstration of the attitude towards Russian journalists by the international journalist community. But of course, we would like to see the International Tribunal and the most audacious propagandists, Russian propagandists, to be brought to such international tribunal. Because they manipulate with information. And Russia sees the information technologies as informational weapon used to neutralize the public opinion. As for our plans for the future, the key thing is to gain support. We are dreaming about victory, and we are eager to bring it as close as possible. But doing that, we should devote the most attention to the deoccupied territories, and we encourage Ukrainian government and our international partners to support Ukrainian media in the deoccupied territories. We need to restart to the local published media, because in situation when the occupants leave the ruins behind, when they and everything is ruined. Local population has no access neither to internet nor to TV Ukrainian TV channel, nor to radio broadcasting, and that is, we have to provide published media, printed press. We have launched publication of the first 25 local media, and the 26th was Slaviansky Visti, a newspaper which is printed locally, and it has the highest level of trust from local population. They are ready to document crimes committed at the local level. Recently, I visited Izum, where one of the biggest sources to get information about alleged crimes committed to be documented, which allegedly were committed, to be documented by the law enforcement agencies, is a local newspaper. And printed media, Ukrainian language media in such deoccupied areas is a big symbol. For example, Visti Snihurivshine, this is only one community in Mykolaiv Oblast which remained under occupation for 8 months. And when it was deoccupied, we immediately launched the newspaper. The same is for Bakhmut, the same is for our journalists keep saying that immediately after the occupation, when the newspaper is delivered by volunteers, its print copy is delivered to people, they start kissing the newspaper because this is a symbol of peaceful life. One of my colleagues mentioned that in Izum, when it was under occupation, her grandfather continued reading old newspapers, local newspapers, printed local newspapers from 2-3 years ago, just to feel this atmosphere of peaceful Ukraine that he enjoyed in the past. And I think that this is quite important. The Swiss Foundation Irandela, with the support of the Swiss government, had started to provide support and resilience, economic resilience to 18 media. Unfortunately, local population in the occupied territories are unable to pay for the printed newspapers today, and we started to use financial support from our partners, and our journalists do not see these donors' funds not as a money that they simply will eat up and that's it, but they are using them to revive newspapers and to launch publication of these local newspapers. And for example, in Chernigiv, editor-in-chief the local newspaper keeps saying, I've been an editor-in-chief of rather successful local newspaper and economically viable local newspaper for almost 20 years. And now I have to publish this newspaper with the foreign support in order to build up my clientele again, to raise the circulation and to become economically viable again. That is the demand for the local newspapers is there, and I hope that we will revive them. As to the punishment, any comments as to the punishment? Serhii, would you like to add more about possibility to find punishment? Speaking about punishments, we should distinguish clearly between the national level and the international level. As to the national level, the responsibility falls on our law enforcement agencies. When the Russian military are imprisoned as prisoners of war, they should be checked against commitment of the war crimes. and we can bring them to responsibility as war crimes against journalists and civilian population. As to the international level, one option is international tribunal, another is application to international criminal court, which can bring to responsibility the for war crimes, because Roman statute explicitly says what is considered to be a war crimes. Another option is to have a special international tribunal like it was for Rwanda. And today I mentioned the International Court of Human Rights, but this is not about individual responsibility. This is about collective responsibility of a state, and this is actually about collective responsibility of the Russian state as a country. And one more instrument which is available for us is a bilateral justice, when our international partners may raise a case against any war crime in their own territory. So this was a brief description of all the possibilities. This is quite diverse options, and we have to choose the right one for each case to make it the most efficient. And if we step back from the theory, we realize that some of the war criminals won't be brought to responsibility because simply physically we will be unable to do that as to many of them, meaning that they are already killed. From the human point of view, this is probably a satisfaction for the victims to know that the abusers were killed. We have time for just one question. I am wife of Serhii Movchan, who remains in prison since March 2022. I would like to introduce a suggestion that our government has to act at the international level and request assistance from other countries who maintain diplomatic relations with Russia, and develop some instruments, some mechanism how to bring back our members of our families. Unfortunately, only relatives of the prisoners of war are fighting for their lives, and we attend the sessions of the Coordination Council. We organize at the international level. We organize meetings and demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations. I would like to encourage all those who work at the international arena to apply to the governments of other countries and allow us to bring our dear ones to Ukraine. We definitely know that they are tortured, they are kept in single cells. We have several cases. Civilians are brought back when they are only tortured to death. We have to draw attention to this problem. We have to draw attention of the entire world to this problem. Thank you for these words. We have to liberate all our prisoners of war. Civilian imprisonment, this is non-legal term, but actually this is the novelty during Russian occupation when people are in prison as prisoners of war. They are relocated to Russian Federation. They stay in prisons without any charges brought to them, without consular support, without any possibility to communicate with their relatives, and without possibility to be attended by the International Red Cross Committee, which is violation of all the human rights. And moreover, these are civilians who have to be brought back. Actually, this is abduction of people done by Russian Federation, and it is very important to preserve their lives and to bring them back. One of the opportunities, Oleksandr Medvedchuk will visit the Pope of Rome in early June, and we encourage the relatives of civilian hostages and civilian prisoners to provide the list of people, the list of cases to us. Please submit it to the Center of Civilian Liberties, and we will try to use this opportunity and draw attention to the destiny of these people. Thank you for your attention today. We believe that the synergy of the freedom of speech and the professional journalism and protection of human rights will make us all stronger. Thank you.